The water pitcher trembled in Lucien Brooks's grip. Not from fear, from control. The kind of control a man learns when he has everything to lose and nowhere else to go. Pure survival control. Maison Belâtre hummed with money that night. The kind of money that didn't whisper, it commanded. Men in suits that cost more than Lucien's monthly rent leaned back in leather chairs. Women wore diamonds that caught the candlelight and threw it across the restaurant like weapons. The air itself felt expensive, thick with perfume and power, and the kind of conversation that ended careers. Lucien moved through it all like a ghost. 23 years of service work had taught him how to disappear, how to be everywhere and nowhere, how to pour wine without being seen, clear plates without being heard. What's exist in a room full of people and still be completely invisible. Tonight, that invisibility was the only thing keeping him employed. He approached table 7 from the left side, the way the manager insisted. The water pitcher held at exactly 45 degrees, his face neutral, his shoes polished despite the worn sole on the left heel that no customer would see because Lucien made sure of it. Every movement calculated, every breath measured. This was survival dressed up as service. That's when the man with the smirk looked directly at him, a cold, calculated look. "Hey, I'm really glad you're here. Be honest, have you eaten today? What did you have? Tell me that, your location, and the time. And if you're new, help me prove something wrong." My mother said drill stories would never reach 10,000 subscribers. But stories like this deserve to be heard, so don't leave without subscribing. It feels empty when you come in and leave without saying a word. Now, let's continue. The man was mid-conversation with his investors when he locked eyes with Lucien. Not a glance, not an acknowledgement, an assessment. The kind of look a person gives something that's briefly crossed their line of sight before they decide it doesn't matter. That was Barrett Crownhill. Lucien didn't know the name yet, didn't know the billionaire tech investor had spent the last 30 minutes bragging about hostile takeovers and the people he'd destroyed in the process, didn't know that Crownhill measured his worth by the number of people he could make feel small. Oh, what Lucien knew was what he always knew. Keep your head down, do your job, get home to Noel. The digital clock on his wrist, the cheap one she'd given him for his birthday 3 years ago, read 7:47 p.m. 13 minutes until his daughter's bedtime. 30 minutes until he had to call her and apologize for missing dinner again. 2 hours until his shift ended. 4 days until rent was due. 4 days. Crownhill picked up his menu, flipped through the pages like he was looking for something to mock. His jaw tightened. His smirk widened. He was hunting for something. Lucien could feel it. Not food. Ammunition. The other men at the table watched, waiting, ready to laugh when the moment came. Lucien filled the glasses one by one. Water cascaded, ice clinked. His hands stayed steady even though his stomach had dropped somewhere into the basement of Maison Belâtre's polished marble floors. Crownhill leaned back and opened his mouth to speak. In that moment, that single second before the words came, Lucien understood. This wasn't just a dinner. This was a test, and he was the subject. The man was hunting, and Lucien was the prey. What came next would echo through the restaurant and into the internet. It would change everything. But in that breath before it happened, Lucien didn't know that yet. He just knew he had to survive the very night, and he had absolutely no idea how hard that was about to become. No idea what was coming next. None at all. "What is this?" Crownhill's voice cut through the restaurant like a blade. He held the menu between his thumb and index finger. The way someone would hold garbage they'd found on their shoe. His investors leaned forward. The table grew quiet. This was the moment Barrett Crownhill decided to make someone feel small. This was his sport. This menu is supposed to be French, authentic French, high-end French. He flipped the page and laughed, a cruel, practiced laugh. But look at these descriptions. Embarrassing. Lucien stood 3 feet away, pitcher in hand. He'd learned not to move at moments like this. Movement drew attention. Attention meant becoming a target. The woman across from Crownhill smiled nervously. The man checked his phone. Nobody wanted to be next. Crownhill's eyes landed on Lucien again. Intentional this time, like a hunter spotting prey in the distance. "You know what I don't understand?" Crownhill said, just directing his words at investors but his gaze at Lucien. "They hire people who probably can't even read what they're serving. How would someone like him know the difference between a Bordeaux and whatever they're calling this? It's laughable." The table rippled with uncomfortable laughter. the kind that feels wrong even as it comes out. Lucien's jaw tightened, not from anger, from pressure, from knowing that one wrong reaction would destroy everything: the rent, the apartment, Noelle's school, the routine that kept them alive. He watched Crown Hill scan the menu again, searching, hunting. The billionaire's fingers traced the French text: coq au vin, bouillabaisse, escargot à la bourguignonne. Each word was a weapon waiting to be deployed. "Tell me something," Crown Hill said, finally looking directly at Lucien. Do you know what any of these words mean? Or does the manager just tell you to smile and nod when the customers come?" The other investors exchanged glances. One man cleared his throat like he wanted to say something but thought better of it. Lucien said nothing. Silence sometimes killed the hunter's appetite faster than any response. But Crown Hill wasn't done hunting. He stood up slightly, leaning forward in his chair, making sure the rest of the restaurant could hear what came next. This wasn't private mockery anymore. This was public performance. "Seriously," he said, his tone shifting to something worse than anger, something theatrical, something that fed on an audience. "You're standing in one of the most expensive restaurants in Boston, and I'm genuinely curious. Do you actually know what you're serving? Or are you just hoping nobody asks real questions?" A woman from Connecticut stopped eating. Her fork hung suspended in midair. The kitchen door was visible from where Lucien stood. He could see the chef through the window, flames dancing, could see the assistant prepping plates with precision, could see a world that didn't care about this moment at all. "I'm not trying to be cruel," Crown Hill continued, his voice dripping with false sympathy. "I'm just asking a genuine question, because frankly, it's concerning that you're here, completely out of your depth." He paused, waited, like he expected Lucien to defend himself, to crack, to prove the stereotype true. Lucien filled the water glasses carefully. Each one received exactly the same amount of water. Each movement was mechanical. Each breath was measured. Control. Always control. Oh, Crown Hill leaned back in his chair, satisfied. He'd made his point. He'd established his power. "You know what?" Crown Hill said, picking up the menu again. "Just get me someone who actually knows what they're doing. Get me someone who can explain this menu properly. I don't want him near our table anymore." The restaurant had gone completely silent. Every eye on Lucien, every ear listening to what would happen next. That was when something shifted inside him, something that had been building for years, something that had been waiting in the darkness. Lucien turned to walk away. Then he stopped. Then he turned back around. And what happened next would echo across the entire restaurant, across the internet, and into a place where people like Barrett Crown Hill didn't expect to be touched. His left foot moved first, a step toward the kitchen. Away from table 7, away from Crown Hill. This was the right choice, the smart choice, the choice that kept him employed. His right foot followed. The restaurant noise resumed around him, forks on plates, wine glasses touching, the low murmur of conversation. People were already forgetting what happened, already moving on to their own dinners, their own conversations, their own power plays. Lucien's humiliation was background music. That was supposed to be good, but his body stopped moving. His feet planted themselves on the polished floor between table 7 and the kitchen door. His shoulders went rigid. His breathing changed. Something inside him, something he'd buried so deep for so long that he'd forgotten it even existed, started to wake up. He could feel it rising. It started in his chest. A heat that had nothing to do with anger. 3 years of yes, sir, and of course. 3 years of swallowing pride. 3 years of being invisible. 3 years of being a ghost in his own life. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear this time, from something else, something that felt like waking up after a long sleep. The water pitcher was still in his grip. Lucien could see Crown Hill in his peripheral vision, already turned back to his investors, already done with him. The billionaire didn't even think Lucien was important enough to watch anymore. That's what the dismissal meant. That's what the "get me someone else" meant. Lucien had been so thoroughly erased that he didn't even warrant attention. And something about that, something about being erased so completely, made the heat rise higher. Noelle's face appeared in his mind, clear, present, real. Well, not as a reason to stay quiet, not as a reason to walk away, but as a reason to stand. She was sleeping right now, probably still in her school clothes, because her grandmother sometimes forgot to change her before bed. She was sleeping because her father worked doubles and missed bedtimes. She was sleeping in a city where her father had stopped speaking, stopped using the languages he'd learned, stopped being anyone at all. What kind of man did that teach her to be? What message did that send? That you could be humiliated in front of strangers and do nothing? That you could be erased and accepted? That you could be the only person in the room who could speak the language of the menu, could correct the chef's work, could actually understand the culture of this place, and just take it? Lucien's jaw clenched so tight his teeth ached. Oh, he'd made a choice 3 years ago, after the accident, after losing everything. He'd chosen survival over dignity. He'd chosen money over voice. He'd chosen silence because silence kept the lights on and the rent paid and the school fees covered. But maybe survival didn't have to look like this anymore. Maybe survival didn't mean being invisible to everyone, including himself. He could feel the eyes on him now. The Connecticut woman, the investors, even the other diners around the room. They all seemed to know something was about to happen. The temperature in the restaurant had shifted. The air had completely changed. Crown Hill was still talking to his investors, still not looking at Lucien, still convinced that Lucien was nothing worth watching. That moment, that single moment of Crown Hill's complete dismissal, was when Lucien made his decision. The moment that would change absolutely everything. Not because he was angry anymore, not because he wanted revenge, but because somewhere between table 7 and the kitchen door, Lucien Brooks stopped being invisible to himself. He turned around. Slowly. Deliberately. With purpose. His shoes sounded loud on the polished marble floor, his breathing steady, his face calm. All the noise in the restaurant seemed to drop away, like someone had turned down the volume on a television. Crown Hill noticed the sound. He turned. His smirk faltered for just a moment, that split second when he realized Lucien wasn't actually gone, that he had turned back. And now, standing directly in the center of Maison Belâtre, with every eye on him, but with his job hanging by a thread, with everything he'd fought for at risk, Lucien opened his mouth to speak, and what came out would change everything forever, absolutely everything. Monsieur, Lucien said, his voice cutting through the silence, si vous aviez pris le temps de lire correctement, vous sauriez que ce plat nécessite une cuisson précise. The room froze. Crown Hill's face went white. Et un peu d'humilité, Lucien continued, his tone calm. He wasn't yelling. He was simply stating facts in a language that belonged to him. The woman from Connecticut leaned forward, her eyes locked on Lucien. Her phone was already up, already recording. Lucien picked up the menu from Crown Hill's table, a move that was part server, part statement. He opened it to the section the billionaire had been mocking. His finger traced the description of coq au vin. This dish, Lucien said, switching to English but keeping the accent thick enough that everyone could hear the authenticity behind it, is from the Burgundy region. It requires a specific wine, a Pinot Noir, preferably from the region itself. The meat must be seared first for the browning reaction, then braised low and slow for 3 hours minimum. The mushrooms are added near the end so they don't break down completely. He looked directly at Crown Hill. Not something you just throw on a plate and hope for the best. Around the restaurant, phones were rising. Not one, multiple. The Connecticut woman's recording was being joined by others. A man at the bar, a couple near the window. The moment was being captured. Crown Hill stood up. His face had gone from white to red. You think you're clever? You think... I think, Lucien interrupted, his voice still calm, that you came here tonight to make yourself feel important by making someone else feel small. But you did it in a place where your ignorance is showing. He flipped to another page in the menu. Bouillabaisse. A Provençal fish stew from Marseille. It requires saffron, fennel, and a specific technique for the rouille. The fish must be fresh. The broth simmered for hours. He looked up. I lived in Marseille for 7 years. I've eaten bouillabaisse from the women who invented it. The table was completely silent now. Even Crown Hill's investors had stopped eating. And here, Lucien pointed to a handwritten correction on the menu, there's actually a typo in your printed version. It says escargot à la bourguignonne, but it should be à la bourguignonne, feminine, because the sauce is named after Burgundy, which is a feminine noun in French. He closed the menu and set it down gently. The manager let me review these menus last week. I found 17 errors. 17. Crown Hill's jaw was clenched so tight Lucienne could see the muscles working. You learned that from Google Translate. You probably... I have a degree in international relations from the Sorbonne, Lucienne said quietly. My wife studied international law. We lived in France together. I worked nights and learned the language because we couldn't afford translators, and she needed to understand the legal systems we were studying. He paused. Let that settle. She was smarter than both of us combined. She was going to change things. She was going to do important work. The restaurant was holding its breath. Then a drunk driver hit our car on Route 128 3 years ago. She died in the ambulance. I survived with a daughter and a mortgage I couldn't pay. Lucien's voice didn't shake, didn't crack. He was simply stating facts. So now I work here. I work doubles. I come home and help with homework that I barely have energy for. I make sure my daughter knows she comes from a woman who is brilliant and kind and wanted to make the world better. He turned his full attention to Crown Hill. What I'm confused about is why a billionaire who has everything would spend his evening trying to destroy someone he doesn't know. What does that give you? What hole in your life does that fill? Crown Hill's face was purple now. Get out. You're fired. And I'm going to have you prosecuted for... For what? Lucienne asked. For defending myself? For speaking a language I actually know? For telling the truth about your character? The manager appeared, hovering, unsure. The owner appeared behind him, phone in hand, still recording. The Connecticut woman stood up. She walked directly to Lucienne's side. I'm recording all of this, she said loudly so the entire restaurant could hear. And I'm not the only one. She looked at her phone. At least 6 other people were recording now. Crown Hill looked around the room, really looked. The moment he realized his power meant nothing here, the moment he understood that the internet was watching, the moment his humiliation became real. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping back against the polished floor. This isn't over, he said to no one in particular. This is slander. This is... But nobody was listening anymore. He walked toward the exit, his investors scrambling to follow him, their power dinner ruined by a waiter who refused to be invisible. The restaurant erupted. Not in chaos, in pure applause, soft at first, then building. A woman near the window stood and clapped, then the man at the bar, then a couple in the corner, then half the restaurant, standing, clapping for a man who had finally found his voice. Lucienne stood in the center of it all, the water pitcher still in his hand, and for the first time in 3 long years, he didn't feel invisible. He felt truly seen. The applause was still echoing through the restaurant when Crown Hill stopped at the exit. He turned back, his face twisted. So what? You speak French. That doesn't change anything. You're still a waiter. You're still... I'm still what? Lucienne asked quietly. The room went silent again. I'm still what, Monsieur Crown Hill? Crown Hill's mouth opened and closed. He had no answer. He stormed out. The Connecticut woman approached Lucienne as soon as Crown Hill disappeared. Her phone was still in her hand, still recording, but now she was smiling. That was incredible, she said. I'm Simone Hartley. Lucienne nodded. He was still holding the water pitcher. His hands had finally stopped trembling. Can we talk? Simone asked. Privately? The manager appeared, looking panicked. Lucienne, He didn't finish. He walked away instead toward the back office, toward insurance concerns and legal questions and problems he didn't know how to solve. Simone led Lucienne to a quiet corner, and a server brought water without being asked. The whole place seemed to understand something had shifted. I run a nonprofit, Simone began. International Opportunities for Professionals. We place bilingual individuals in meaningful work across multiple countries. Lucienne listened. He'd learned to listen. I speak French too, Simone continued. I lived in Belgium for 5 years working internationally. When I heard you speak tonight, not just the fluency, but the way you carried yourself after, I knew. Knew what? Lucienne asked. That you were wasting your time here. He didn't argue. He didn't defend the restaurant or the job or the routine. They both knew she was right. I have questions, Lucienne said, about stability, about insurance, about custody. I have answers, Simone said. Or we'll find them together. She pulled out a business card. It was simple, black text on white. Her name, a phone number, an email. Call me tomorrow, she said, during your lunch break. We'll talk about what's possible. Lucien took the card. It felt heavy in his hand. Heavier than the water pitcher ever had. The rest of his shift passed in a strange fog. He served tables. He poured water. He existed in his old routine while everything had actually changed. Other servers kept glancing at him. Some customers asked him to take photos. One woman cried and said he'd made her believe in standing up for herself. By the time he clocked out, it was nearly midnight exactly. His phone had 37 missed calls. News outlets, online forums. Someone had uploaded the video already. It had 3 million views. 3 million people had watched Lucien speak French to a billionaire in Boston. He didn't watch the video. He drove home instead, to the apartment in Dorchester, to the small bedroom where Noelle slept. He stood in her doorway for a long time, just watching her breathe. She was still in her school clothes. His mother-in-law had tucked her in anyway, without changing her. That was okay. That was love doing its best. He thought about what Simone had said, about wasting time. 3 years ago, when his wife died, Lucien had made a calculation: money versus dignity, bills versus voice, survival versus selfhood. He'd chosen the math that made sense at the time. He'd chosen to disappear. And it worked. Noelle was fed. The apartment was paid for. She went to school. She had asthma medication and winter coats. But she also had a father who came home exhausted and silent, a father who'd stopped being anyone, a father who'd learned to take it, whatever it was. What kind of lesson was that? Lucien sat on the edge of Noelle's bed. Her breathing was steady. She was 7 now, old enough to start asking questions, old enough to start understanding that her father's choices shaped what she believed was possible. He thought about his wife, about how she would have hated seeing him like this, diminished, erased, using survival as an excuse for surrender. She'd taught him to stand, and then she'd died, and he'd forgotten. But tonight, he remembered. The video kept spreading. By 2 a.m., it had 5 million views. Crown Hill's name was trending. News articles were being written. Someone had dug up his history and other incidents. Other humiliations he'd inflicted. A pattern. A predator who'd finally met resistance. Lucien's phone rang at 2:47 a.m. It was his mother-in-law. She was crying. "I saw the video," she said. "I'm so proud of you. Your wife would be so proud." He couldn't speak. Couldn't form words. "You did good, baby," she said. "You did real good." After she hung up, Lucien sat in the darkness of his daughter's room and finally let himself believe that maybe, just maybe, things didn't have to stay the way they'd been. Maybe standing up didn't mean losing everything. Maybe it meant gaining himself back. Subscribe now and turn on your notifications because the aftermath is about to get complicated. The internet is watching. The manager is panicking. And Crown Hill is about to make his biggest mistake. Honest comment below. What would you do if your job was on the line but your dignity was finally standing? The call came at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. Lucien was making Noelle's lunch when his phone buzzed. Peanut butter sandwich, apple slices, juice box, the routine he could do with his eyes closed by now. The restaurant was calling. He didn't answer. It called again, then a text. "Need to speak with you, urgent." He finished the lunch, made her breakfast, walked her to school. By the time he arrived at the restaurant at 4:30 p.m., he already knew what was coming. The manager was waiting in the back office, so was the owner, and a woman in a suit who introduced herself as a lawyer. "Sit down, Lucien," the manager said. Lucien sat. "Barrett Crown Hill has filed a lawsuit," the lawyer began, her voice steady and professional. "Emotional distress. Defamation. He claims you created a hostile work environment, that you embarrassed him in front of business associates." Lucien said nothing. "His legal team is threatening to sue the restaurant as well. They claim we created an unsafe environment by employing someone willing to publicly humiliate a paying customer." The owner's face had gone pale. "We have 2 options," the lawyer said. "We fire you immediately and distance ourselves from the situation, or we fight back." The owner looked at the manager. "Fire him." "I'm sorry, Lucien, but I can't risk the restaurant." "Wait," the manager said. "The video has 30 million views. Crown Hill's companies are losing contracts. His investors are distancing themselves. If we fire Lucien, we look like we're kowtowing to a bully. But if we stand with him, if we make a statement that Crown Hill violated our standards, then we become the restaurant that stood with its employee. The owner was torn. The lawsuit will happen either way, the manager said, but firing him makes us look complicit. Standing with him makes us look strong. Lucien pulled out Simone's business card. I got a job offer from a nonprofit doing international work. I'm leaving next month anyway. The lawyer looked at the card. The owner looked at Lucien. So you're leaving, the owner said. I'm choosing myself, Lucien said. For the first time in 3 years, I'm choosing what's best for me and my daughter. The manager smiled. Here's what we do, Lucien said. Fire me. Tell Crown Hill you took action. I'm leaving anyway. You satisfy his demand. I get a clean exit. The owner was quiet for a moment. Okay, he said finally. I'll make a statement. You resign to pursue other opportunities. Mutual agreement. Crown Hill can claim victory. And the lawsuit? The lawyer asked. Without him at the restaurant, Crown Hill has no case, the manager said. We've already won. Lucien stood up and extended his hand to the owner. He held steady and firm. Thank you, Lucien said, for the work, for the opportunity, for believing in me when it mattered, but I needed to find myself again. The owner shook his hand. His grip was firm. His eyes were sad but understanding. Lucien walked out of the office and into the restaurant for the last time as an employee. Other servers watched him. Word had already spread. They all knew what this meant. Marcus, who'd worked there as long as Lucien, now stepped forward and hugged him. A man hug, respectful, solid. Go be somebody, Marcus said. I already am, Lucien said firmly. He walked home instead of taking the bus. He needed the time, needed space. The April air was warm. The streets of Boston were coming alive after winter. People were outside, living, existing. He thought about Simone, about the card in his pocket, about a different kind of life. He thought about Noelle, what she would see when she looked at her father now. Not a ghost, not an invisible man, but someone who chose dignity. When he picked her up from his mother-in-law's house, she ran to him immediately. She always did. Daddy, I made a painting of a butterfly today. I'm a scientist now. I study things. He held her close. She smelled like her grandmother's cooking and pure childhood innocence. Yes, you're going to be whatever you want to be in this world, Lucien said, and I'm going to be here every single day to see it happen. He held her as she talked about her day, about science, about bullies at school that she'd told to stop, about the teacher who praised her for standing up for another student. She was already learning, already understanding that sometimes you have to stand even when it's incredibly hard, especially then. Lucien called Simone at 12:47 p.m. He was sitting in his car during lunch break, parked behind the restaurant. The sun hit the windshield. His phone felt heavy. Lucien? Simone answered on the second ring. Hi, he said. You said to call. I did. How are you feeling? He thought about how to answer. The truth was complicated. He felt lighter and terrified simultaneously. I quit, he said. It was mutual. Because of Crown Hill? Because of me, Lucien said. Because I finally decided I was worth something. There was a pause. Then Simone said, That's exactly what I needed to hear. She talked for 30 minutes. About the nonprofit. About work in West Africa, Eastern Europe, and Southeast Asia. About communities that needed people who understood language and culture. Most candidates come from traditional paths, Simone explained. But some of the best people I've met come from unexpected places. They have real experience, real empathy. You're talking about me, Lucien said. Exactly you, Simone confirmed. 7 years in France, a degree, a language that's yours, a daughter who matters, and a moment where you chose yourself. What does the job look like? Lucien asked. We place you with NGOs doing humanitarian work, education programs mostly. You teach French and serve as a cultural liaison. The bridge, Lucien repeated. Between worlds, Simone said. Between people who need help and people who want to help. That's what you are, Lucien. You're the bridge. He thought about that. All his life, he'd been moving between worlds, between his wife's ambition and his own survival, between Boston and Marseille. Maybe being a bridge was what that meant. There are practical things, Simone continued. The position is in Senegal for 18 months. Room, board, salary. We cover insurance and health care. Senegal, Lucien said. The word felt foreign and right. Is that a problem? Simone asked. No, Lucien said. No, it's not a problem. It's an answer. They talked through details. Start date. Visa requirements. Training. How Noel would be cared for while he was in country. The nonprofit had university partnerships. She could stay with his mother-in-law. You don't have to decide today, Simone said. But the position needs to be filled by May 1st. That gives you about 4 weeks. I don't need 4 weeks, Lucien said. I need to make sure my daughter is safe and supported. I need to tell my mother-in-law. I need to think about what it means to be away. But the job itself? Yes. The answer is yes. He heard Simone smile warmly through the phone. Welcome to the team, she said. Lucien Brooks, you just became more than a waiter. You became the bridge. After they hung up, Lucien sat in the car for a long time. His phone was already buzzing. More messages, more interview requests, more people wanting to know his story, about his background, his thoughts on power and class and standing up. He didn't answer any of them. Instead, he drove to Noel's school. He picked her up early. He took her to the park. He pushed her on the swings and let her tell him about her day, about math problems, and a boy who pulled her hair and a girl who shared her snack. Daddy, why are you here early? Noel asked as they walked through the park. Because I wanted to spend time with you, Lucien said. Did something bad happen? He thought about how to explain. How to tell a 7-year-old that her father had finally made a choice that would change everything. Something good happened, he said. Something really good. And I want to tell you about it. They sat on a bench. The sun was warm. The city hummed around them. I got a new job, Lucien said. Yes, in a country far away called Senegal. It's in Africa, and I'm going to help people there learn and grow. Will you be gone? Noel asked. Sometimes, Lucien said. But I'll come back, and you'll be safe with Grandma, and we'll talk every day. She processed that. Then she reached out and held his hand. Okay, Daddy, she said. You can go be a bridge. He looked at her. How did you know that's what I'm doing? Because Mommy was a bridge too, Noel said. She wanted to help people. You're like Mommy. Lucien held his daughter close, and for the first time since his wife died, he felt like maybe, just maybe, he was living the life she would have wanted for him. By morning, the video had 50 million views, not thousands, not millions. 50 million people had watched Lucien speak French to a billionaire. Oh, the news cycle had shifted completely overnight. Every major outlet covered it. CNN, MSNBC, The New York Times, different angles, same story. A single father had humiliated a tech billionaire through cultural competence and moral clarity. But that wasn't even the biggest story anymore. The internet had done what the internet does best. It had dug. Someone found Crown Hill's history, articles about companies he'd destroyed, employees who'd quit citing hostile work environments, investors who'd backed away from his ventures. A pattern didn't just emerge, it exploded across social media. Hashtag Fluent Father was trending on every platform. Hashtag Dignity Wins had 50 million posts. Hashtag Crown Hill Exposed was a living documentary of a man's professional demolition. Lucien's phone wouldn't stop ringing. His email was flooded. Major networks wanted interviews. Book publishers wanted to sign him. A documentary filmmaker wanted rights to his story. He ignored all of it. Instead, he sat with his daughter at her elementary school's career day. He listened to her tell her classmates that her father was going to Africa to be a bridge. A bridge, she explained with the absolute certainty of childhood, was someone who helped people cross from one side to the other. The other parents looked at Lucien with new recognition. Some approached him. Some asked for photos. Some just smiled and nodded like they were witnessing something historical. Maybe they were. By Wednesday, Crown Hill's company faced serious investigations from concerned investors. By Thursday, 3 major contracts had been pulled. By Friday, past employees filed lawsuits claiming harassment and humiliation. But Lucien had shown them the way forward. His phone rang constantly. The manager from the restaurant wanted to hire him back in a senior capacity. The owner wanted to make him a partner. Hotels wanted him as a consultant. Universities wanted him as a guest lecturer. He turned them all down. On Saturday, a reporter from the Boston Globe finally caught up with him outside a grocery store. She was young, sharp, respectful. "Lucien," she said, "do you feel responsible for what's happened to Crown Hill?" He thought about that carefully. "No," he said finally. "He created the situation. I just refused to disappear. The consequences are his to carry, not mine." "But you're the reason this all came out," the reporter pressed. "No," Lucien said. 50 million people watched the video and decided to look closer. The internet decided to care. I just stood up and spoke the truth. Everything else was already there. People just finally saw it." The interview ran Sunday morning. It was thoughtful, fair. It presented Lucien as someone who hadn't sought this moment but hadn't backed down from it either. The comment section exploded. People who'd stood up to abusers, people who'd chosen dignity, people who'd been fired for speaking truth, people who'd been invisible their whole lives suddenly saw themselves in Lucien's story. He became a symbol. Not because he'd asked to be, but because sometimes, when you stand at exactly the right moment in front of exactly the right audience, you become more than yourself. By Monday, Crown Hill had resigned from 3 company boards. By Tuesday, his personal life was disintegrating in real time. His wife had left him. His investors had abandoned him. His reputation had been decimated by the same internet that had once celebrated his success. Lucien watched it happen from a distance. He felt no pleasure, no satisfaction, just a sense that balance had shifted, that the world had briefly corrected itself. He thought about calling Simone. Instead, he called his mother-in-law. "I'm taking the job," he said. "I'm going to Senegal. I'm going to be a bridge like my wife wanted to be." She cried on the phone, happy tears. "Your wife would be so proud," she said. "I know," Lucien said. "I finally feel like she is." The phone rang at 5:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. Lucien was making dinner. Noel was doing homework at the kitchen table. Chicken with rice. Simple, clean. He didn't recognize the number. He answered anyway. "Lucien Brooks?" A woman's voice. Professional. "Yes? This is Judge Patricia Morrison from Massachusetts Superior Court. I'm calling regarding Barrett Crown Hill's claim against you." Lucien's stomach dropped. He thought it was handled. "Your former employer filed a counterclaim," Judge Morrison continued. "Defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress. He's claiming $12 million in damages." $12 million. Lucien sat down. "However," the judge said, "the court has reviewed the evidence, the video, the context. We've determined that Mr. Crown Hill's claim has no merit. The courts do not protect people who engage in workplace cruelty. Your statements were truthful. Your response was proportional." "The claim has been dismissed," Judge Morrison said firmly. "With prejudice. Mr. Crown Hill cannot refile. I wanted to call you personally to inform you before public notification." Thank you," Lucien said quietly. "You did nothing wrong," Judge Morrison said. "You did something courageous. Carry on." She hung up. Lucien sat in the silence of his apartment. Noel was watching him carefully, the way children do when something fundamental has shifted. "Daddy, is everything okay?" He looked at his daughter, at her homework, at the life she was building, at the world where she would grow up knowing her father stood when it mattered. "Everything is more than okay," he said. He called Simone. She screamed, actually screamed, then laughed, then cried a little. "This is going to be in every news outlet by morning," Simone said. "Lucien, do you understand what just happened? East Crown Hill tried to destroy you legally, and the court sided with you publicly." After they hung up, Lucien made a decision. He called the restaurant. The owner answered immediately. "Lucien, what's wrong?" "I won't be coming back," Lucien said. "Not even for the last 2 weeks. I need to move forward completely." "Of course," the owner said. "Take care of yourself. You earned it." He called his mother-in-law and told her everything about the job in Senegal, about the court decision, about the judge calling personally. She cried on the phone, happy tears. "Your wife is watching," she said. "I know she is." That night, Lucien and Noel went to the park. They sat on the swings as the sun went down. Boston sprawled around them, the city that had seen him invisible, that watched him stand. "Daddy," Noel said, "are you happy now?" He thought about it carefully. "I'm becoming happy," he said. Every day, I'm becoming more myself. That's what happiness really is. She nodded like that made perfect sense. By the time they walked home, the news was breaking. Major outlets reporting that a court had sided with Lucian Brooks against billionaire Barrett Crown Hill, that the judge had called personally to notify him of the victory. Hashtag justice served was trending again, but Lucien wasn't watching the news anymore. He was helping Noelle with her bath, reading her a bedtime story, being present in the way he'd been unable to be for 3 years. He was finally home. The next morning brought more chaos. Crown Hill announced he would appeal. He claimed bias. He launched a social media campaign. Nobody listened. The world had decided. The internet had decided. The courts had decided. But the real decision, the one that mattered most, had been made by Lucian Brooks the night he turned around in a restaurant and refused to be invisible anymore. That decision was irreversible. That decision was permanent, and as he packed boxes for Senegal, as he prepared to become a bridge between worlds, as he walked toward a future his wife would have been proud of, Lucien finally understood something fundamental. Power isn't about money or position or the ability to humiliate people. Power is about the choice to stand. Maison Bellâtre looked exactly the same. Same polished marble, same candlelit tables, same power dynamics at every corner. Lucien stood at the entrance and felt nothing. No pull, no nostalgia. It was May 1st. He'd come for his final paycheck and resignation documents. Lucien pushed through the door. The restaurant went quiet. Not all at once. Table by table, server by server, people who'd seen the video recognized him. A woman clapped. Then another. Then Marcus put down his tray and clapped loud. The whole room stood up. It wasn't a planned moment. It was just people honoring something they'd recognized in Lucien. The choice to stand, the courage to be seen. He didn't cry. He didn't smile too wide. He just acknowledged it with a nod and walked toward the back office. The owner was waiting. He had the paycheck ready, a letter of recommendation, a formal acknowledgement that Lucien had resigned to pursue international opportunities. "I'm proud of you," the owner said, extending his hand. "You showed us all something we needed to see." "Thank you for not protecting him," Lucien said. Thank you for understanding." He walked back through the restaurant one final time. Not as an employee, not as an invisible man, but as someone who'd refused to disappear. The news crew was set up outside. They filmed him walking out into the Boston sunshine. They asked him about Crown Hill, about the court case, about Senegal. He answered clearly, honestly, without anger or bitterness, just truth. "I'm not the story," Lucien said. "Standing is the story. The choice to refuse invisibility is the story. Crown Hill will live with his consequences. I'm going to live with my purpose." After the interview, Lucien drove to Noelle's school. She was waiting at pickup with her backpack and her homework folder. She'd worn her favorite dress, the purple one her mother had bought her before the accident. "Did you say goodbye?" Noelle asked. I did," Lucien said. "We're ready." They drove to his mother-in-law's house to pick up the suitcases. Everything he owned fit in 2 large bags. Everything Noelle would need while he was in Senegal fit in one. That was all he'd accumulated. That was all he needed. His mother-in-law cried when he left, happy tears mixed with some sadness. "She's so proud," she whispered. "Your wife is so proud." "I know," Lucien said. "I finally know." The airport was complete chaos. Flights delayed, crowds everywhere, the typical machinery of travel. Lucien moved through it all calmly. They had their visas, their documents, their purpose. At the gate, Noelle squeezed his hand tightly. "Are you scared?" she asked. "A little," he said honestly. But scared is what happens when you're doing something that matters." "Like when Mommy did her work?" "Exactly like that," Lucien said. The plane lifted off at 6:47 p.m., same time the judge had called, same time that changed everything. Lucien looked out the window at Boston disappearing below them, the city where he'd been invisible, the city that watched him stand, the city where he'd learned that power isn't something you're given, it's something you claim. He thought about Barrett Crown Hill, about a man so convinced of his own power and importance that he'd humiliated someone he thought was beneath him, about how quickly that power had evaporated the moment someone refused to accept the hierarchy. The saddest part? Crown Hill still didn't understand. He still thought he'd been treated unfairly. He still believed he was the victim. Yeah, Lucien felt nothing for him. Not even anger, not even bitterness, just clarity. He turned to Noelle. She was already asleep, her head against the window, her hand holding his. And in that moment, as the plane climbed toward Africa, toward his new life, toward a future his wife would have wanted, Lucien Brooks finally felt like he'd come home. Not to a place, but to himself. Subscribe now and turn on your notifications because the journey doesn't end here. Part 2 is coming. Crown Hill makes his final move. Lucien's work in Senegal changes everything, and what happens next will prove the choice to stand never stops echoing. Comment below. Where did you stand when it mattered most?